Hello and welcome to Shit I Wish Someone Told Me, a weekly series of educational conversations where my guest and I talk about all of the shit that we wish someone told us at one point or another so that you don't have to figure it out the hard way. I'm your host, Johnna Renée, and I am an evidence-based life coach that specializes in teaching you the how-to when it comes to helping yourself by learning what works for you so that you can stop feeling like shit and start actually feeling good about who you are and knowing who that even is. Joining us today, we have Miss Shanon Deyerle. Womp, womp, womp. She's a therapeutic coach out of power.place.purpose on Instagram, or you can find her online at the same name with no dots, powerplacepurpose.com. And what we are going to be talking about with you today is shit that we wish someone would have told us about the evolution of boundaries. We are specifically going to be focusing on the awareness that boundaries need to evolve because most of us don't even realize. We think it's like a set it and forget it kind of a thing. And so we're really going to be leaning into talking about that today, how to recognize when it's time for those to shift and how to actually do it. Because we're not just telling you like, hey, this is a problem. We're also giving you tangible solutions to solve. And so our goal today in doing all that is to prepare you for the pivot that needs to happen once this evolution is upon you. And so as you listen to this episode today, we invite you to think about two things. First of all, what boundaries in your life need to evolve right now? And secondly, what is that telling you? What is that telling you? And what is it that's telling you that that boundary needs to evolve? So what boundaries need to evolve right now? And what's that telling you? So three things. And then what is telling you that that boundary needs to evolve? So while you're thinking about that, we planted that seed. Now let's, add some water and like let the seed germinate as we move through our conversation today. I'm going to introduce you to our guest. So Shanon, like I mentioned, is a therapeutic coach. She combines her master's degree in counseling with her life coach certification to help clients reach their goals. When you work with Shanon, you can expect a safe place to explore your beliefs and their origins, challenge their truth as you understand their impact, and develop a deeper sense of who you are so that you can choose a path forward that aligns with your authentic self. Like I mentioned, you can find her online at power.place.purpose on Instagram and online at the website powerplacepurpose.com. And we are so grateful that you were here as always. I love our conversations. Is there anything else you want to add or say before we dive into our conversation today?
No, I think this is a good one. You covered well and sort of primed the pump and got us going. So I'm excited for us to have this evolve as we talk about evolution.
How appropriate. What? Look at that wordplay. Okay, cool. So let's get into it. What is some shit you wish someone told you about the evolution of boundaries?
This is, I feel like, always my question when you say what's some shit somebody would have told you about, fill in the blank. I'm always like, that it's a thing.
Right? Same.
Right?
Same. I'm like, I didn't even know that I was supposed to know this.
Right. So first and foremost, that it is a thing. That boundaries are not, as you said at the beginning of our conversation here, a set it and forget it, a one and done. I decided people need to treat me this way, so this is my boundary, and this is what I'm going to do to enforce it. They evolve because we evolve. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but that's the number one thing. And then the number two thing I was thinking about that we'll talk about as well, I think, is that they can change because they're not working, which I think is something we all would sort of grasp and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But they can also change because they are working.
Right.
So we'll get into that as we talk as well. But I think it's a really interesting piece of the puzzle, of the boundary puzzle for us to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to mention too is that so this is a continuation of our boundaries series. Like we're doing a whole last series on boundaries because this is so complex. And so there is our foundational episode, Boundaries 101, which is episode 53. So make sure to listen to that if you have not already. And that really talks about a bunch of stuff that applies to all boundaries. And we had a second episode where we speak to the importance of boundaries with yourself. So that's going to be episode 68. And so you can check that out as well. I'll link all those in the description. And so what we're talking about now that you have that foundation set, and now that you are in a place where you're practicing those boundaries with yourself, we're looking at that evolutionary component. And yeah, like you said, like you wish someone told you that that was even a thing that you needed to be aware of. And so we're looking and identifying that boundaries are connectors, as a refresh, that boundaries are, yes, with others and also with ourselves, like we talk about in episode 68, and that they evolve, which is what we're talking about today. And so we're going to be looking at 3 primary different things, concepts, if you will, in that evolution of boundaries. So like you shared, that we don't know, people don't know that boundaries need to evolve. And like you said, people don't realize that they have a lot of times. Like sometimes, like, it's working and it needs to evolve, and sometimes it's not working, it needs to evolve. And then we're also going to talk about how people don't want to address the elephant in the room. So we're really going to look at those 3 things and workshop them in a way that supports you to get this well-rounded view of the evolution of boundaries. And so let's take it from the top with what you just shared, is some shit that you or someone told you about boundaries, and that's that the evolution of boundaries, that they, even need to do that. And so, how do you know that a boundary needs to evolve?
Well, I think this is going to be an idea that we repeat throughout this conversation. And so bookmark this in your brain as you're listening. Because what I think is one of the big indicators that a boundary needs to evolve is that you feel something is off, right? Something about what made it work before, that feeling you had, that emotion that went with it, and that sort of way it dictated the way you behaved, has started to feel different somehow. And it doesn't have to mean good or bad. There's no necessarily, there's no value attached to it when I say that. But you start to notice that that it's a little bit different than it was before. And that could be, just like I mentioned at the beginning, a boundary is working well for you, and it could also mean that it's not. You want to talk a little bit about that, Johnna? How do we know a boundary is working? And then how do we know that it isn't?
So, love your share, as always. I think that whenever we know a boundary is working, that it is a situation where it's a sigh of relief, right? You're like, oh, okay, like I did it, right? And this is, it's helpful whenever we are looking at building inner trust, because we are able to say, like, oh, like I was able to acknowledge this was something that needed a boundary. I was able to enforce it, and like, look, it's working. And
Yeah.
so it feels like a sense of relief. I know personally in my body, a lot of times when there's something that I need to set a boundary with, it feels either a bit anxious or like really tense, like this is uncomfortable, there's some resistance there. And so when a boundary is working for me, that goes away. It's something where I'm like, oh, okay. Like maybe not in, immediately, but I start to notice over time, like, hey, I don't feel that way about this thing anymore.
Yeah.
And so those are some tells for me about when a boundary is working. When it's not working, it's something where those things don't go away. Like you might, of course, like I said, give it time. Like when you enforce the boundary and create the boundary and enforce it, like it might not work immediately. That doesn't mean that it's not working, but it might be something where if there's a lot of time that has passed since then and you still notice those sensations, you still notice those feelings, then that is an indication that like it's not working. And whenever we're also looking at that, it could be something where you know it's not working in the way that you thought it should or it was. And so I think that tell is like, yes, but like, yes, but it's still not quite, this is not what I ordered. This is not
Yes, it's a meal, but it's not the meal I asked for. Yeah.
right. It's like this is chicken, but this is not Parmesan. This is like you put like some hot sauce on it. And so this is yes, but no. And I think that that is another way that for me, it's like because like, how do you describe that? Like, you just kind of know. You're like, yes,
Yeah.
something has shifted, and at the same time, not in the way that I want it to. And so those I think
Mhm.
are some tales for me, um, when it comes to knowing that a boundary needs to evolve.
Yes. And I think it's worth noting that you can notice those internal feelings, the relief or the continued tension or the yes, but, and not necessarily know that that meant or means something has to change, that there's an evolution that needs to occur
Right.
and that it's within your control to do so. Because I think a lot of us might feel, um, something's off. I've already said what it is I need to say,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've already
Mm-hmm.
done that work. And so
Right.
that can't be the work I have to do again.
Right. Right. It's like, but why do I have to? Like, I've already done it. It's someone else's turn to help with this.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I totally get that. It's like, but I don't want to again. Like,
Yep.
this is something that I call Josh Britnell, and I talk about this a lot, the Beyonce effect, where it's like I saw this video one time where Beyonce was like, why did God give me these gifts? And she's crying. And so I think of that type of situation in that way where it's like, oh, like why do I have to be the bigger person? Like why do I have to be the one? Like I know how to like
Mhm.
why am I the self-aware one? Like there's also a quote that's like, a lot of people are in therapy because the people that need to be in therapy aren't. And so it's
Yes.
just like to
Yeah.
deal with them. And I see this as being kind of like that in the way that it's like, but I did the thing, like,
Mhm.
why can't you do it? And granted,
Yeah.
it could be like a misunderstanding. Maybe they didn't
Mhm.
interpret the boundary like you meant. And so that's just a conversation. But I definitely relate and understand when it's something where it's like, oh, why do I have to do this again?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
do I have to be the
Yeah.
parent or like the bigger person? So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that's something that you mentioned that I want to touch on. Just because other people don't interpret the boundary as you meant it, or they are resisting it, doesn't mean that it's not working, right? It could just mean that,
Yes.
yeah, it's a miscommunication. It doesn't necessarily mean like, well, I need to just like screw that person, right? So,
Right.
yeah, tell us about that a bit.
Well, and I also think it doesn't mean that you're the person is incapable of
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
respecting the boundary. It's
mm-hmm.
just that something, right? Something happened. There's a resistance there because it's like to keep using the metaphor of like, well, they ordered a meal and it's not what they asked for,
Right,
right? So they're looking at it and they're like, am I supposed to eat this if I don't think I'm going to like it? And there's
right,
resistance,
right.
right? And
I
and
love
that's okay. You would do the same thing. You're like, I don't know what to do with this. And so there is a little bit of a learning curve. There is also a little bit of within that learning curve, have I learned, the person who's been offered the boundary now, right, from you, have I learned how to do the thing that they're asking of
Mm,
me?
right. Because whenever you shift a boundary, whenever you create and enforce a boundary with someone that has never had one before, you are, and we talk about this in previous episodes, changing the relationship dynamic. And
Yeah.
so we talked about that in the first episode. Like when you do that, people are going to feel some kind of way about it. And so it's important to make sure that
Yeah.
you're prepared for those instances. And so, this can look like a lot of different things, and check out episode 53 for that, Boundaries 101. But I want to mention it here that it's important to, first of all, know that, like you said, it might not necessarily be, hey, this isn't working, or hey, this person's incapable. It might just be that, like, your version of what this means is not my version of what this means. And that's something that
Mhm.
I used to talk about whenever I was in management, where like my version of done is not necessarily your
Mhm.
version of done. So, what I might mean, just to
Mhm.
give context, is what I might mean by done is everything project in a folder, file, signed, sealed, delivered, like
Mhm.
complete. Your version of done, not necessarily you, because I know you, but someone else's version of done might be, well, the first draft is done. Like that
Mhm.
means that like I can take a sigh of relief. And I'm like, that's not done. That's on the way.
Right.
So it's important, like taking that back to our boundaries conversation, it could be that like what my version of this boundary is not what your interpretation of it is. And that's not anyone's fault, but it is something to note and to
Yes.
not like feel any kind of way about, because we're all just looking at shit from our own point of view.
Yes. And that is why, oh, this is so good. That is why I love describing describing boundaries as bridges,
Mm-hmm.
as connectors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because someone's over here doing their
Mm-hmm.
thing, someone's over here
Mm-hmm.
doing their thing, and we're trying to understand each other better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a boundary is. It's an opportunity to say, "Hey, I like to go on this path." And the other person's like, "Well, let me understand that path."
Mm,
And so when you look at it that way, instead of a hard and fast rule that says, if they don't do this, they're out,
yeah.
which some boundaries have to be that
Right.
rigid.
Right.
Um, but if you look at it as a connector, then you realize that it's really good news that you don't want to turn around and run back off your side of the bridge. That
Mm-hmm.
when there's something that's not working and someone's not getting it, if you want to keep walking across and try to understand what they're missing, that's actually great news because it means you care about the health and the value of this relationship in your life.
Which brings us to an important point, like, is what you are feeling inner resistance or inner welcoming? Which is like what
Mm,
you just described, I feel. Is it
mm,
something where you're like, mm-mm, mm-mm, do
mhm,
not pass go, do not collect $200. Like you said, I'm going to turn around. I'm
mhm.
just going to like leave you here at this juncture at the bridge.
Yeah,
And I'm going to
you
keep on keeping on
yeah,
like
exactly.
my own way. Is there a resistance where it's like this feels really uncomfortable in the way that like I don't feel safe? Or
Yes.
is there an inner welcoming like you just described where it's like this isn't working and I want to make it work? Like I'm curious about how we can continue to build this bridge together. And so
Mhm,
you have to decide, yeah, like what works for you. And
mhm.
um I think that that's really important, and that's like a really valuable way to offer you being able to start to identify like what is this discomfort? Is this discomfort me not feeling safe and being resistant to it, or is this discomfort, me just not being familiar with this type of situation and being
Mhm.
scared about
Yeah.
the uncertainty and about the potential, like, well, what if this, means that we're going to end, kind of a thing, because that's
Mhm.
different. That's different, like, like a fear of knowing the truth, a fear of, like, let's say the relationship ending is different than a fear of, or excuse me, a resistance from like just not feeling safe in the situation. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we all need to feel safe, so that's not we're not trying to say that that's like a lesser thing to pay attention to, but it's just on this spectrum of, what is the moment in that experience that's really your end point. You've got to really decide that for yourself. Um, is it that I don't feel safe and I'll never feel safe?
Yeah.
Or is it, somewhere else along that line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, so when we are looking at needing to know that boundaries evolve, um, I just want to mention like why it's so important for us to realize that. And that's because, like you just shared, it really is a great indication of um,
Mhm.
your growth in relationship with others and with yourself, in wanting to find ways to make it work and find ways to evolve that boundary. And, even if that evolution means an end in a relationship,
Mhm.
then I mean, that's growth too, because it's just the cycle.
Yeah.
Hard,
Yeah.
hard pill to swallow there. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, wanted to offer that.
I agree. And I think one of the things that I'm realizing, maybe I just want to take a moment and acknowledge is when we talk about what it means to evolve, right?
Hmm.
It could be that you're taking where you're at and you're leveling it up,
Hmm.
right? You're saying in a more specific way, these are the things I need because I know our relationship is capable of that.
Right.
And that, but it could also mean pulling back or simplifying that boundary
Hmm.
where we say, okay, I asked a lot. There's a resistance happening. This person doesn't understand what I just gave them on the plate. So instead of giving them the 5-course gourmet meal, I'm going to just start with a simple salad and a burger, right? Or fries or whatever. I mean, I'm not trying to sound any kind of way, but it's like, look, let me meet you where you're at. Let's connect.
Yeah.
Okay? I want to be able to share time and space with you in this way. So if what I asked for was too much and I still value you and I still want to figure this out,
Mm-hmm.
then let me make it more simple.
Right. And also,
So evolving isn't always going up,
right.
right? It's sort of like just refining.
Yeah. And to what came up for me with that, I'm like, yes. And also make sure you're not settling. This is when it's time to look at those boundaries with yourself. Like when you are in a position of compromising where
Yes.
you were like, okay, that was a lot. It's not working. Let's simplify. Make sure that you aren't simplifying to the point where you are self-sacrificing or where you
Yes.
are breaking any boundaries within yourself, that you're settling for some bullshit, because you don't do
Yes.
that either. Um, so yeah, it's, and this is what this is what, is so ah about self-love
Yeah.
and like self-awareness, because it's like there's not black and white, like it's all gray, it's many shades of gray.
Mhm.
And you know some situations that I might simplify some boundaries on are totally different with, depending upon the people. And so it's something where you have to know your values and you have to know what you're comfortable with and you have to know what is going to serve you, and not be settling for you. So
Well said. I'm really glad you added that because I don't want us to that's another piece of the evolution puzzle, right? It's not that I always have to um go along this decision tree line. It's
right,
that, when I reach a certain point in that decision tree line, I'm allowed to say, this is my limit. This is
right,
my boundary for me.
right,
And nothing supersedes that.
right. All right. Well, I think
Yeah.
we covered situation number one. Thank you for that. And yeah, so people don't know that boundaries need to evolve. So let's touch on the second component of our three today.
Hmm.
When people don't realize that boundaries have evolved. So how do we know? And we touched on that, like
Hmm.
whenever I was like, how do I know it's working? I think so. In that similar vein,
Hmm.
how do you know when something has evolved? When a boundary has evolved, excuse me.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what you were saying. There's a noticing. There's a noticing that's happening here that either we're responding differently to some people around us or internally, to a situation that we may have had one experience that's sort of consistent and now it's feeling a little different. We're responding differently because of that.
Right.
Um, we might also feel sort of in an imbalance, like
Mm,
maybe when you establish the boundary and there was that work that had to be done and you got to that place where it was working and you were connected, now that's feeling a little wobbly again. So what is that about? Where is that showing up,
yeah.
in terms of your insides, but also in terms of how it looks on the outside? And maybe also the way things, related to these two, the way things worked when the
Mm,
boundary was sort of in place and effective and enforced and operating well, um, that's not working anymore.
right.
Or and so there is something that needs to change,
Right.
and there's just an awareness that the energy or the effectiveness is not quite where it needs to be.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think that, thank you for sharing those. I agree. And this is the importance of reflection, right? Like this is the
Mhm.
importance of taking the time to not just, woo, like go streaking through the quads of life, but to actually take time to like sit down, put a robe on and think about like, okay, what did we learn here? What did we learn?
Mhm.
What seems to be true? What's still working? Like what's not? And this isn't saying that you have to make this some big ordeal, but you can just think about it while you're, safely
Yeah.
driving the car or while you're going for a walk. You can just think about that thing that was important enough that you took the time to create and enforce a boundary. And you can just think about the situation like, how has it shifted? Like, has it? Like, is it working? Is it not?
Mhm.
Like, just ask yourself these questions. And if you perceive something to be different, then get curious about that. Like, okay, so like you said, what used to work isn't. And so, is that another conversation that needs to be had? Is that time for you to step back? Like, what seems to not be working? Is it working better? Right? Like, is it something
Right.
where, because that can also happen, like maybe the boundary is working better than you thought. And like, let's say it's like, hey, I need some more space. And the person's giving you like too much space, kind of a thing, right? Like, you miss
Right.
them.
Right.
So this is, to the shades of gray here. And just to stress and emphasize, not stress, like let's emphasize the importance of
Mhm.
taking time to reflect. Because it's important to notice that these boundaries evolve. Because if, you think that enforcing a boundary is going to be, a one and done, then it's something where it can become, a barrier instead of a bridge. It can
Yeah.
become something where it's no longer a connector, but it's, yeah, like a rejector, if you will.
Ooh, look at you.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's something where I think that it's important to see, maybe if there's a better way to get to where you want to go, um, and, not close someone off to that. There's a situation that, I mean, I want to share about me evolving a boundary. And I
Yeah.
think it's important to note too, it's something where, um, the boundary was enforced. And so I
Mhm.
recognize like, hey, it's working, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
there's this also this state of mind where I'm like, I don't want to just assume like, hey, like we're good, like I don't need to still maintain or like, you know, show the bridge some love, right? Like I don't have to think
Okay.
about it anymore because there is that potential that it could be crossed again. Like, nothing is actually certain. And so it's important to weigh your, cost there. Like, would me, taking the time to do the maintenance to make sure that I'm still like upholding my boundary. I'm still checking in on it. Like, okay, she's good. We're still,
Mhm.
oiling the parts or whatever you do to bridges. Um, making
I
sure
think
the
that's more
concrete
like a car.
well, making sure the concrete's good. You like to do concrete restorations, but I'm maintaining the bridge, like we're sweeping her
Right.
off, like we're taking good care
Right.
of her, making sure that I still do all of those things because the cost of me not paying attention to that bridge and having that boundary crossed is worse. Like it's higher than me maintaining that boundary and making sure that um it's something that I'm still checking in on. And so I think that that's important to note as well. Like whenever we're talking about like not setting them and just being, a one and done and the importance of reflection, there's also, an importance of recognizing if you just assume it's done, like we're good, that if it's then therefore crossed and, not respected, then it can be something where you end up finding yourself like back in this state that like you just don't want to be in that could have been prevented had you just maintained the boundary, had you
Mm.
just done your check-ins, had you just not oiled it because apparently it's your cars, but had you just, you know, made sure that you took care of the bridge, swept it off, and kept it in good care instead of just like letting it decay.
Yeah. Well, Johnna, let's take that a little further because I think this would be helpful. So to take the metaphor, the oiling of the bridge slash sweeping it off. So what would that look like in your scenario? I assume you're talking about something where you needed space from a person, right? You needed to like make sure that that person respected that you
Mhm,
needed that space.
mhm.
And now you're talking about making sure that that continues to be respected,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So how does one do that?
Great
What does
question.
the sweep look like for you?
Great question. For me, so it looks different for everyone, like, which I
Mhm.
feel like we say that a lot, but I mean, that's true. That's great.
Mhm.
And so for me, what that sweeping or oiling looks like is making sure that I maintain my distance, making sure that
Mm,
I don't send any signals that would
mm,
say, hey, like, I'm open to reconnect. Like,
right.
make sure that I'm just keeping my not front, so to speak, but make sure that I'm clearly saying with my body language, with my mannerisms, with my communications that like there is no bridge. And
Yes.
that is my like that is how I am taking care of my bridge, so to speak.
Mhm.
Is to say that like so not necessarily there is no bridge, but like you can't cross it kind of a thing.
Yes,
Like
yes.
taking
The
it to
more important bridge is the bridge inside of me,
right.
not the bridge I have with you.
Right. And so we
Yeah.
were talking about like trolls on a bridge kind of a thing, but like the trolls being negative thoughts. And so in this case, it's like you're the troll. So you
Mhm.
cannot cross the bridge to me. And
Right.
that's the way that I personally am making sure to uphold it. And so that's where I'm saying like it needs maintenance. Like, could I, do things that would signal, hey, like it's okay. Like
Mhm.
let's have a conversation, like even if it's small talk. Sure. But do I want to? No. Is that okay? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's something where that's like my maintenance, just making sure that I am aware and mindful of my own communications and like how I'm showing up, um, so that I can continue to enforce and like maintain my bridge.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps. And it's interesting, you're talking about maintenance as part of the boundary picture, right? And I want to bring this into the idea of evolution because I think what we can do here is take this metaphor and even farther, right? So you're maintaining your bridge, right? And you're seeing that it's just the way you want it. Awesome. But what if you start maintaining your bridge and you're realizing that there's something that's loose over here,
Mm,
right? Or something that maybe isn't quite fitting anymore. This is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about um, the idea that something that used to work isn't.
right,
This is a place, if we're tending to our boundaries,
right,
right? Then we are getting information, we're getting hints or little feelings or little nuggets that are saying this is functioning the way it should, or this is not functioning the way I hoped it would.
right.
And so what is my responsibility here? What's my half of this bridge? How can i show up to do that work? And then is the other piece of the bridge, the other person's side, is that something I can say in this relationship? For example, you don't want to go over to the other person and say, hey, you got to leave me alone. You're not going to do that, right?
We might.
um I mean, that would be an interesting story. But like if it's someone you really want to stay connected to, and you might maybe see that they're piece of the side as well, then you might be able to like, hey, can we just check in with each other?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah,
So I know we're speaking metaphorically, but I think that I hope that makes sense, right?
yeah.
That there is stuff that we can do when we're checking in on our boundaries that gives us information that
Mhm.
then we have to decide what to do with. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And one other thing that I wanted to note before I move on to the last thing, thank you for that. And it's that whenever we start to notice that, hey, like some of these boundaries are working, right? What that does is you're no longer having to put so much, like if you're having to put like
Mhm.
100% into like that and like creation and enforcement of the boundary, you get to then like drop back, maybe not to 0%, right? Because you want to maintain that shit. You want to
Mhm.
fix your screws and like whatever. But apparently not oil it. But you get to then take that energy that was invested and you are then able to put it in other places so that you can start to notice like, where do I need to, give some maintenance to some of my other boundaries? Like,
Mhm.
what part of this seems to be working, but that I can, what part like doesn't? What part of this like might I need to use some transfer skills? Like, where are these areas that like this one's pretty tidy, like this bridge is pretty good,
Mhm.
so let me see like what other bridges I can have in my portfolio, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when you think of it like that, it's something where this is like the concept of balance that comes into play, right? Like being able
Mhm.
to like, okay, like that one needed attention,
Right.
now it's good, doesn't mean we can leave it alone, but
Mhm.
it means we can show up in other areas and like check in and be like, hey, this really worked over there, what might be able to work over here, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
so that's just to demonstrate the value that comes with the enforcement of these boundaries. Like it really opens up your time and your energy, and um, improves, like I had said earlier, like your confidence in being able to trust yourself enough to advocate for yourself. And if it worked in
Yeah.
one instance, all right, cool. Like, where else do I need it? And what skills
Mhm.
can I transfer from what I learned to make it work in that instance as well?
Mhm. Yeah. Well said.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah. You're welcome.
So let's talk about the third, which is people don't want to address the elephant in the room. So,
So, yeah, let's talk about what the elephant in the room would be, right? The elephant in the room would be when you've got your boundary up with
mm-hmm,
the person that you're talking that we were just giving the example around, right?
mm-hmm,
And that person keeps coming up and trying to talk to you,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? For me, it might be, I can remember growing up, my dad would always take the phone off the hook.
Mm.
I'm old. We had the phone on the kitchen wall, everybody.
I
So
remember
you'd,
that.
right? So you'd take the phone off the hook so that no one could call us during dinner,
Mm.
right? There's a boundary. But every once in a while, because this was the olden days, friends, somebody would ring the doorbell during dinner.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah, I know. And so, that's not an exactly an elephant of the room in the room, but it's a similar idea, right? Where you put up a boundary and something is happening
Mm-hmm,
where it's awkward, right?
mm-hmm,
It's not working, and we all know it, but
mm-hmm,
we don't know what to do about it,
mm-hmm,
right? So for me, when something like that happens, I feel anxious
mm-hmm,
because I'm like, what did I do wrong
mm-hmm.
that we're not talking about this, we're not fixing this, and dread where I'm like, okay, this is going to keep going on and on until I say something because I was the one who asked for this in the first place.
Right.
Um, those are with certain boundaries. With other boundaries, I get overwhelmed. The anxiety turns into an overwhelm, and I shut down. And I say to myself, all right, you know what? I'm incapable of dealing with this right now. I'm going to go take a beat by myself, process this on my own, and hopefully figure out a way to address it later. But those are some of the ways I know there's an elephant in the room, and it's usually having to do with the way I'm perceiving what's happening in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What do you notice when there's an elephant in the room?
So, an awkwardness, it's like there's a resistance. It's like it just feels awkward. It's like this isn't, like we don't like this
Mhm.
kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, Also, it's something where sometimes I get very shut down. Like I'm
Mhm.
not like a like you can
Mm.
tell because I just am like no, like
Yeah.
I set a boundary that's just like do not engage, and so
Mm. Yeah,
yeah,
so your one boundary not working turned into another boundary that's like hard and fast.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
This ain't working. I'm out.
yeah. And then another thing is that I've spoken about this before a lot with you, but I used to be very angry, and so I will get combative, I will get defensive, I
Mm.
will get resentful. I will go to this place where I'm very much just like no, like,
Mm. Mhm.
and you know, I look at it as, is this me abdicating for my own needs, or is this me, not knowing how to navigate this in the situation right now? Because if there's other people around, is it something where you can really or want to like, embarrass like the other person, and
Yeah.
say something in that moment? And so my go to would be to get angry, combative, defensive because who wants to be around someone like that? So then it's something where it's like, well, we just don't want to talk to her kind of a
Right.
thing. And
Right.
so that's something where I've had to learn over time. It's like, oh, well, that's actually your response because that was like what I learned to do, like to navigate. Like people don't want to be around like angry, mad people. Like,
Mhm.
and so they just leave
Mhm.
them alone. And so that was those are some things that I notice in myself whenever I am in a situation where I'm like, this isn't working and we're not quite sure what to do yet. And so like no one's called it. It's like
Mm. Mhm.
it's like we're aware of it, but no one's called it. And so
Mhm.
um yeah, those are some tells for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wanna take a moment to connect a couple concepts together. We've talked about boundaries. This is our third conversation now. One of the things I think would be important to remind people of in this moment is, you know, your awareness of an elephant in the room, a boundary being crossed, a
Mhm.
boundary that needs to be set, a way to deal with it. It's all connected to what you learned, right, in your growing up, what you understood were acceptable,
Mm,
ways to get what you needed. And
mhm,
then also the values you hold, right, about how things should work
mhm.
and who you want to be. And, you know, the bigger picture of the world, right?
Right.
Do you value, independence over, conformity? Do you value, capitalism over socialism? I mean, we can go any way we want to go, but all of those things come together into the moment where you realize, right, I have to do this thing in response to the elephant in the room.
Yeah. 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 And this is again, like it's all gray. Um,
Yeah.
more of the shades.
Everyone's different.
So another thing that I want to note whenever we're talking about this elephant in the room is an isolated event versus like an actual regression or an actual indication that the boundary isn't working anymore. And
Mhm.
so what I mean by that is if you create and enforce a boundary and
Mhm.
then it gets crossed, is that because this is new and this is something that you're both still learning, or does it get crossed, it gets crossed again, it gets crossed again? And so that's what I'm saying, like, is this an isolated event, like oops, it happened once, like
Mhm.
I'm still learning or they're still learning, you're still working out that new dynamic, maybe you mention it, maybe you don't, maybe just see what happens, or is it reflective of a consistent behavioral pattern that you are seeing time over time again? And something that I want to mention as well is that um, it's important to address this elephant in the room and notice that, like, hey, this thing happened again, right? Like they crossed this boundary. Um, it's not working
Mhm.
because it's there to tell you something. And like this
Yes.
feeling is there to tell you something. Your feelings are there to tell you something. And what that tells you is going to impact your relationship, your sense of self, your mental health, your anxiety, like all these different things. So it's important to note these things. And I don't necessarily mean that you have to like write, dear diary, today it happened again. But
Mhm.
I do think it's worth putting a note like in your calendar. You could put it under something if you so other people have access to your calendar so that it's like you can search and see like, oh shit, actually this has happened like once a week, or once a
Mhm.
month or three times a week. Because what oftentimes happens, and this is something that a lot of my clients you know start to feel really down on themselves about, um, is that some boundary will be set, a boundary will be set, and then there will be a gradual regression from like the other
Mhm.
person. And so then fast forward to a few months later and they're like, but I why would I allow this? Like, why would I put up with this? Like, I
Mm.
this isn't how I want to treat myself. Like, this isn't, who I am. Like, I thought I knew better. And this is
Mhm.
something where I have to remind them that this didn't happen overnight. It's not like you set the boundary, it started working, like just like it took a little while for that dynamic to shift and the boundary to be enforced, it likely took a little while for it to stop working as well. And so
Mhm.
it's important to note that it wasn't like a really stark, usually contrast and like,
Mhm.
oh shit, they did it again. But it
Mhm.
probably just started to slide. So maybe let's say it's like a time boundary, right? Like let's say that like it's important that you show up for date night on time when they
Mhm.
were, habitually 30 minutes late, let's say.
Right.
And so
Right.
maybe for a while it worked, you're on time, but then maybe, oops, it started to slide. Like you would be 5 minutes late. And you're like, well, no big deal. It's 5 minutes. Like you're working on this, right?
Right.
Then
Right.
that 5 minutes over time turns to like 10. Then that turns to, 15 or even 12. And it's something where, you know, in these isolated events, we might not necessarily be like, oh, he's doing it again. We might be aware of it, right? But we might not want to call
Mhm.
them on it because we want to give people grace, want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like they're working on it, I'm working on it, we're all just trying to figure life out. And at the same time, if it's something where, we go to what we know, they're going to eventually, gradually, potentially go back to that thing. It might not be that they intentionally did it. It might
Right.
not be that they meant to just show up 30 minutes late again. They might not know why they're doing it either. I mean, I can tell
Mhm.
you why they're doing it because that's what they've always done. So trying to do it
Right.
in time is hard for them. Neural pathways, like we can talk about that. But it might be something where when that happens, the person who created and enforced the boundary feels like, well, I've been putting up with this, like I've been settling. And so it's something where I'm offering you this insight of a gradual regression because it's not your fault that you've essentially been like conditioned, right? To
Mm.
for them to
Mhm.
slowly like get back into that. And it's not that
Mhm.
they're necessarily being manipulative, they might be, but benefit of the doubt, assuming that all people are just doing the best that they can, it's likely that they didn't even know it was happening either. And so I
Mhm.
offer that to you to give you the sigh of relief, to relieve the pressure, first of all, and to
Mhm.
also just share that this is why it's important to reflect. This is why it's important to have that awareness. This is why it's important to know when it's happening. And this is why it's important to like not just say like, oh, it happened again, let me crack the whip kind of a thing,
Right.
but to note it and then to, see what you want to do about it.
Yeah. And this is where the idea of maintenance comes in.
Hmm.
And this is where the idea of when you're doing this reflection and realizing that it's not working, you want to tie it back to your values and your beliefs. So I set this boundary around time because
Hmm.
what? Because I want to be I value being number one in this person's life,
Right.
or because I don't want to waste time for people at the restaurant. I value respecting other people's time
Hmm.
as well, right?
Hmm.
And we could go down a list of all the other ways that
Hmm.
that the or I believe I should be respected. My time is just as valuable as yours.
Hmm.
So when those pressure points are being pushed on, whichever ones they are, based on what we value and what we believe, that is an indicator that I got to talk to this person about it, right? And because their values around time are probably different than mine. And so when we talk, we connect, we translate, and this person starts to understand, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't realize I was doing that. Or yeah, you know what? I don't care. I'm always going to be late.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's not because I don't respect you.
Yeah.
It's because I struggle with this.
Yeah.
And so no matter what, the boundary offers the other person information about what you value, and then their response, whether it's working or not, offers you information about where they're coming from too.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an example right out of Johnna's storybook. Um, I was smiling when you were saying that. Like, give me all these things. I'm like, yeah, Shannon, I finally just said, fuck it. I finally just said, if it's a you thing, if it's your friends, like, I don't care. Because I would have rather, like, that person was very important to me. And I
Right.
was like, this isn't worth us getting in an argument about
A
it.
fight every time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I noticed. So this is a perfect example of what we spoke about earlier, like not settling. I was like, if it's a your friend thing, if it's a your family thing, I don't give a fuck. Like,
Right.
we can show up to the next day. Like, if
Right.
that's what
Right.
you want. Like, these are your people. I'm tired of getting stressed about it. Like, I don't need gray hairs. I'm tired of trying to micromanage you. Like, I'm not your mom.
Hmm.
So I don't care. Like, I love you. So it is what it is. I'm here.
Yes.
I don't care if we're late to your things.
Right.
However, when it was my friends' things, it was something where I was like, what can we do to make this work? Like, I love you. I want you to be there. Like, I know this is the thing. So we had a lot of conversations about it. And I was laughing because you were like, you don't want to disrespect other people's time. I was like, oh, Shannon, we did. We did so many times and I felt so bad. But that's not my ass. Like, by association, it
Right.
is. But at the same time, I'm just like, I didn't do it. So in those instances, we had to have some really hard conversations where I
Yeah.
was like, I'm just going to go so that I'm there on time. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to do that at all.
Right.
And at the
Right.
same time, I don't want you to have to stress out. So just know that I'm going to not settle. I'm going to make sure that I'm there for these important things, these events of my family and friends. And I want you to be there. You are important as well. And yeah, like I'm not going to be late because you
Yep.
can't get there on time.
Yeah.
Um, and
What a perfect description of an evolving boundary,
thank you.
right? You started one place. We have to be on time everywhere.
Yeah.
Then you realize that was not working.
Yeah.
So
Jesus,
then
that
you
did not
went,
work. I
no.
remember, Shan, story time. I remember one time we were leaving. It was New Year's Eve. We're
Okay.
supposed to be there at 9.
Uh-huh.
We are pulling out of our apartment complex. And they're like, oh, wow, we're actually not that late. It's only 11. And I was like, we were supposed to be there at 9. And they were like, yeah, but it's only 11. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, okay. Like, this is your friend thing. This is your friend thing.
Message received. I get it now.
Yeah.
I
I
get
was
it
just
now.
like, okay. So
Wow.
yeah. Um, so I get it. I get it to anyone
Yes.
who is going through that. And I hope that this made you laugh, because Jesus. Yeah.
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 So I think that those are some good examples of that. And I want to quote something that you shared on this before we start talking about what we actually do about it and wrap up for our conversation.
Okay.
That
Okay.
was that, whenever we were speaking in terms of, feeling some kind of way because um, there's that gradual regression, right? And
Mhm.
what you shared was we often judge ourselves for the place that we find ourselves instead of saying, wow, this is different from where I've been. What is this telling me? And so I think that is very important to not internalize and
Mhm.
be, shameful about the
Mhm.
reality of the situation, but to put on your researcher hat and be open to curiosity,
Yeah.
because that judgment is just going to put you in a shame spiral. It's going to put you in, this place of, yeah, internalizing like the situation that might not be your fault. Like if they're always late,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
so um it's different, and acknowledging that, obviously. And so, yeah, like, what's it telling you, and what do you want to do with that information? It's all just R&D. So wanted to make sure that we
Yeah.
said that. Anything else that you want to add before we talk about what we do about these evolving boundaries?
I just would add, this is okay. I know I beat the same drum over and over, but this is why I care so deeply about teaching people to develop a relationship with themselves.
Hmm.
Because if you have an understanding of yourself and what you value and what you believe, then every single bridge that you build, every boundary you offer, and every time you enforce or maintain that or allow it to evolve, it's coming back to the right place inside of you.
Yeah,
And if that's happening, no matter what is going on the outside, you're beginning from and growing into the right place because it's aligned with you.
I love that. I love
And
that.
so we just have to keep remembering to tune back in. And that can be really hard if we didn't learn that, but that's partly why I do what I do, right? Like we all have to learn ourselves, just like we learn other people and we learn skills and all of those things. And just if you feel this frustration, if you feel this judgment coming in around, why am I here? Jesus, I've been here 30 times.
Hmm.
That's your sign that you just need, that you can, not you don't need, that you can use that opportunity to just get curious, to just dig into, well, something's going on with me here. What is this information telling me?
Yeah,
What is it that I'm looking for that I'm not getting?
I love that. And if you need help, I know some coaches. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And I love like circling back to yourself, like you said, power plays purpose, exactly what you talk about. And
Mhm.
um in that instance where it was like we're supposed to be there at 9, it's 11. I'm like, yeah, like in myself, it's more important that I just don't give a shit about this right now, because
Right.
that's gonna give
Yeah.
me gray hairs I don't need.
Right. Yeah. And that is okay. You don't, here's another way to look at evolving boundaries, by the way. And I don't want to make it seem like you're giving yourself a pass when I say this, but you may find that it is important to evolve a boundary because it's not worth your time to get upset over it. Right. Um, and that may be situational.
Yes. Yes.
Right? You knew in that moment, nothing you were going to do was going to make that person go any faster.
We're in
Right?
my car. You better not have gone faster.
Right. Right. So you're like, you gauge the situation, you understand inside yourself what you need,
Yeah.
what you're capable of, and what this situation may or may not allow for,
Hmm.
and you make a decision based on that too. So they can evolve situationally as well, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There's no shame there either, by the way. You have to choose based on your internal barometer of like, this is more important to me than that right now.
Yeah. For that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about three very important things when it comes to evolving boundaries. And that's noticing that they, or not knowing rather, that they need to evolve, not realizing that they have evolved, and that people don't want to address the elephant in the room when we recognize there's been a shift or there hasn't been a shift.
Mhm,
And so
mhm,
when it comes to all of those, what do we do about it? And we have kind of touched on some of this throughout our
mhm,
conversation, but I want us to make sure that we put it all together here in a very concise manner, because regardless of which of those three situations you encounter, you're probably going to encounter disclaimer all of them at some point if you have
mhm.
not already. So prepare yourself now that you have taken the red pill and know. Um, so what do we do about it in those situations?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go back to my same thing. Pay attention, right? Pay attention to what is happening internally. You're going to be having physical feelings,
Mm-hmm.
sensations in your body, or reactions that then determine your inner experience, right? Your emotions around that, the meaning you attach to those emotions, the beliefs you have about yourself, all of that is sort of like on this sliding scale. And so become aware of what's happening, and know that you're allowed to slow down in that moment and reflect so that you can decide what you want to do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think that something that we talked about as well in our pre-conversations for this talk was that if you have a belief that a relationship is only supposed to work, quote unquote, supposed to work
Mhm.
in a certain way, then the elephant in the room that we talked about gets harder and harder to address, right? Because you're just like, oh God, it's not working. Like, we don't
Mhm.
want to say anything about it because it's uncomfortable. Because what if that again, like that's uncertain? Like, what if that means the relationship ends if you say some shit and hits the fan and now it's a big situation? So it's important to acknowledge that, your beliefs, this is kind of what people mean when they say like you're holding yourself back, are the beliefs that you have about how the relationship should, quote unquote, be working, or supposed to work, you know, are those things interfering with the potential for the relationship and what it
Mm.
could be? And so I think that that's important to note as well whenever we're talking about this awareness around, feeling, like you said, what, how am I feeling about this boundary? How am I feeling about this relationship?
Mm.
And then also recognizing, you know, what is the belief about how I think things should be? And is that the problem? Right? Like,
Mm.
is that
Mm.
the block?
Can I offer you a pretty personal story that is kind of coming up for me when you say that?
I mean, if you would like to,
Okay.
you're always welcome to offer.
Okay. Well, so in my relationship with my happy dance, in my relationship with my spouse, who actually tomorrow is our wedding anniversary. We've been together. We were married in '96. Okay. It's
Congratulations. Happy
2022.
anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So 26 years. Is that right? Yeah.
I don't know. I can't
22,
do,
96.
yeah.
Yeah. 26 years. Um, we've gone through a lot, and I can talk about this because we've talked about it. So I'm not telling anything that is not mine to tell. Um, but our relationship began, we were in college. We were
Baby.
young and silly and partying and, all of that. And that relationship evolved, got deeper, got stronger. But we hit a really challenging part in our relationship. And that was that he started to develop an addiction to alcohol, and his alcoholism really impacted our life. And up to the point at which it became a problem, one of the things that we did together a lot was we would get great food, drink a lot of good drinks, and hang out and talk. And both of us struggled with what we thought our relationship should look like versus what it needed to evolve to.
Yeah.
And he needed to not be drinking. I needed to know how to hang out with him when there wasn't drinking. Um, and we pushed back on that belief of how we were, like, we were the people who were right, always together at parties and always having fun. And while it's not necessarily the same as what you're talking about, that really pushed on my heart, because I was like, yeah, like I thought we should still be able to be those people at a party, not with drinks in our hands,
Right.
right? But in that same way. And what he was trying to tell me was, I I don't want to be that person anymore. When I try to be that person, number one, I'm not being authentic to myself. And number two, I'm putting myself almost in harm's way, because now I'm in that place that makes me feel I only fit in here this as this persona.
Yeah.
So we had to work on that bridge around that experience where I started to understand, oh, okay, we can be social with other people, but in a smaller way, right? And he learned how to tolerate some discomfort. He got stronger in his sobriety to say, okay, well, I don't have to show up as that person. I can be, I can be out and about and doing my thing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
So the shoulds do keep us stuck,
the shoulds keep us stuck.
and they keep the other person stuck too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And happy anniversary.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
congratulations for being able for you both to realize that and evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. We've done a lot of negotiation. And as a side note, the benefit to letting go of how we thought we should be with each other was we made room for
Mm,
us both being able to really be more authentically ourselves. And that created much more honesty, which made it hard, but which also made it more real, right?
yeah.
And then made space for me to say, hey, I need us to work on this. And for him to say, hey, I don't understand that. And for us to do even more
Yeah.
connecting.
To create that intimacy.
Hmm.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
become aware, first thing.
Hmm.
The second thing, like we mentioned, whenever we're thinking about what do we do about it, is to track it. So don't just make a mental note, because let's be honest, you're going to forget. You're going to think back and be like, well, I think it was then. I think it was a full moon. And then like half past, it's
Hmm.
Tuesday. I had this project due. Like, don't do that. Don't do it to yourself. That's more stuff in your brain. You got enough in there anyway. Like I said, put it in your calendar. You can write it down in your diary. I personally like the calendar method just because you can search. You can put it under whatever feels good for you. You can put it under Zaboombafu, like, like you. And
Name it
so
whatever you need to name it.
name
Yeah.
every new
Yeah.
name. Yeah. Or like it happened again. But just so that you can do a quick search and see, like, oh, snap, this has been happening more than I wanted to admit, because your confirmation bias, if you're like, no, no, like, I don't want it to happen, you're going to forget. Like,
Hmm.
you're going to
Hmm.
forget, like, I promise. And so, not to be a nerd about it, but I mean, it's important. So,
Right. And I would say too, one of the things that might be tempting when we're tracking that, because I can already see where my brain's going with this. I'm like, that person did that again.
mm-hmm,
Right.
right.
That might be something I would do if I'm feeling a little petty or some kind of way about it. So remember, this is not about them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's about you. I felt this when this happened,
mm-hmm.
and start from there,
Yeah,
because we don't necessarily need to blame or track or get like um petty and resentful.
right.
We may be noticing that coming up,
Right.
which is another thing we're going to be aware of. But this is for you.
Right. And
Yeah.
thank you for that, because yeah, I'm not suggesting you track it because I'm like, so you can pull out the Rolodex like
Right.
next time you get in a fight. That is not what I'm doing. I'm, like you pointed out, and thank you for doing that. I'm suggesting you do this so that, like you said, like, okay, I can see clearly, evidentially, like this is,
Yes.
this is true. Like there's
Yes.
not any kind of misinterpretation or like a skewed view about it. Like you can see it, like it's there. And so yeah, like this isn't, like I said, for you to look what
Right.
you
Right.
did, like rub their
Yeah.
face in it, but it is to, yeah, become aware. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
thank
maybe you could look at it too as an opportunity to reflect on a boundary within yourself,
you.
right?
Mhm.
Whenever I feel X because of this situation, I'm going to make sure I honor that inside of me. And this is how I'm doing that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also spoke about maintenance. So, thinking of it as if it's anything that you have to maintain. So, like, you have to get your car, oil changed regularly.
Hmm.
And so, this is kind of the same thing whenever you take it to the terms of boundaries. And that is, like I said, like, do that reflection. Like, is it still working? Is it not? And check in on it regularly so that you know the weak spots. This is like we spoke about, Shannon, you had mentioned like your diagnostics test, right?
Hmm.
You're seeing like, is this working? And that's what we mentioned in episode 68, boundaries with yourself. And so it's looking at the parts that are like, yay, let's do this. And they're like, no, like this needs to shift. And that's something that can happen, like, especially as you become more familiar with it, right? Like, as you become an expert in anything, these
Hmm.
types of like boundaries are a skill, relationships are a skill, these things are a skill. And so, while at first you might need to, take the mindful time, like sit down, like actually write it out, journal it out, think about it. And then as time moves on, it might be something where you are able to just say, like, that boundary that I set here, like this is working really well, or this isn't really working well. Like, here's what I need to do about it. So it might be something that um, you shift as well, like as you grow and evolve in
Yeah.
how you actually do that reflection piece and like do that maintenance part. So I wanted to put that out there
Hmm.
as well. It might require
Hmm.
a bit more work in the beginning because it's new. Anything that is
Yeah.
new, you're going to have to put more time and attention to. Like if you're trying to learn a different language, you are going to have to put a lot of time and attention into, a simple greeting versus after you've done it several times and after you've had several, greetings, then you're just able to do it while you're, walking down the street, like it's
Hmm.
second nature kind of a thing. So it's
Hmm.
a similar concept whenever we're thinking about this maintenance of boundaries, where you might have to sit down and do some things initially and really focus, and that might evolve over time to where it doesn't require as much focus to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe it might for some, like for some big ones, for some new ones that you haven't done before, but you will have done all of that work already in the other instances. That's just going to empower you and set you up for more success with this one. So keep
Yeah.
that in mind, that it's not going to be as daunting as time goes on. If it feels daunting now, it's going to be a
Yes.
skill that you are a skill that you are learning, so that, yeah, it gets easier for you to be able to do these
Hmm.
things.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to add too, Johnna, that one of the things that I work with my clients on, and I'm sure you do too, is, you know, there is the skill of identifying and acknowledging boundaries and enforcing them. But then there's also, like, let's bring it down even more specifically, the skill of knowing how to communicate that,
Mm-hmm.
the skill of using the words that you want to use to really reflect your experience. And so, please, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, that all sounds great, but I don't know how to say that to someone, right? That's okay, because that's also a skill that we've got access to teach you, but also that you can absolutely learn.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some, one of the things I said when we were talking about keeping track of what's gone on,
Mm-hmm.
putting it in terms of yourself. Start there. That's a very simple little nugget for you. Use it as an I statement. I felt X
Mm-hmm.
when this happened
Yeah.
because of Y.
Yeah.
And because what you allow yourself to do in that situation is take responsibility for what you felt, right? It's about you, it's not about the other person. And the other person can hear it that much better when they don't feel attacked or judged or put in
Right.
the hot seat.
Where they don't have to play D. They don't have to play
Mhm.
defense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank
Yeah.
you for that. Yeah, I think it's very important. We could have comment, let us know if you want an episode. Should have wished someone told me about communication, because I mean that's a whole
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah. I mean, that's so critical to all of this. And to bring it back to what I was saying before about yourself, if you don't believe you're allowed to say what's
Mm-hmm.
bugging you, guess what? You're just gonna keep shoving that shit down, and you're gonna feel worse and worse and worse. So you may know how to say it, but if
Mm-hmm.
you don't believe you're allowed to say it,
Yeah. A whole nother thing.
then
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing. So
Yeah. And
I may be like moving us around here, but I think it's all related, and I
yeah.
don't want to forget to remind people, like, this is these things coexist.
Yeah.
and co-evolve.
Mm-hmm. And spoiler alert, we're going to be sharing in November. So next month, we're going to be talking about boundaries with family just in time for the holidays. So yeah, we're going to be giving you some Mad Libs verbiage, so to speak, so that you can apply that. And compassionate communication came up whenever there's a concept called compassionate communication that speaks to how to have these kinds of conversations. For anyone that's like, well, how do I even say this? Then you can reach out to us, or you can, look up that and see if that offers you some support as well, because I think that that's like a good starting point for a lot of people. So once we have become aware of the situation, we've started tracking it, we have started maintaining it. Now, what do we do with all this information? I think that's important to note as well, because when we have, done this situation where it's something that, we do the work and we get it, and now it's like, okay, but what do I do with this information? Whenever I did the polls for should I wish someone told me about self-discovery, this was the other thing that people struggle with. There were 3 things that people responded they struggle with when it comes to self-discovery, and it was how uncomfortable it is, what to do with information once you get it, and then like how to do it. And so whenever you're looking at it like that, it's important to be honest with yourself, first of all. Like, don't try to make something out to be something that it's not. Give yourself time to look at what's presented. Like, don't just kind of, oh yeah, I need to think about that, and then like don't, like that's not like, yes, that's becoming aware, but also that's kind of like bypassing, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, I see the speed limit sign. We're gonna pretend like so don't do that. And give your so if your car diagnostics, for example, says that you need to be get an oil change, and you don't get that oil change, then it's going to be a bigger problem later. And so that was how Shanon had articulated it. Whenever it's something where it's like, okay, like I've recognized it, but at the same time, like I don't want to do anything with it, right? Like, what do I do with it? It's something where the cost of not, it's not like, well, it could happen, like this could be a bigger problem down the road. It's that it will be. And so that's not to scare anyone, that's just to say, hey, like, this is your warning signal, like, or this is your alert, this is your alert. This is saying that, yeah, like you could ignore it, but also you're going to have to do a lot more damage control down the road than if you dealt with it here and now. And so with that, proceed accordingly.
Right. And I want to say too, Johnna, one of the things that I keep thinking when we're talking about, red flag, warning signal, pay attention. I think my initial reaction from my experience is like, oh shit, I'm in trouble, right? The red light went on, the warning flag is up, something's wrong.
Right.
And I think it might help to take that energy away from what that red flag or that engine light or whatever it is means, because it doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean you're in trouble or you're a problem or whatever it might mean. Or whatever we might think it means. It could just be saying, hey, we need to check this out.
Right.
And if we say to ourselves, the warning lights are really just indicators that we need to check things out, then they really are just maintenance. They're not crisis points.
Yeah.
And when we come at them with that energy, we also allow the other person on the other side to receive what we're offering in a much more collaborative way, right? Like if I'm coming at you like, I tracked this, right?
Yeah.
And you have done this 4 weeks in a row for the last 4 weeks, and I'm really pissed and blah, blah, blah. This other person's like, oh, well, I clearly can't do anything about this right now, and I feel like I'm being attacked. But instead you say, hey, I've noticed that every time, in the last month, I've been feeling frustrated about not getting places on time,
Mhm.
and I want to check in with you about that and just let you know that it's still bothering me and what's going on. Can we have that conversation? They're two totally different ways of approaching the same desired result.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for that. Yeah, because I was just thinking if someone came out with came at me with like, "I tracked this and you did that," I'd be like, ain't nobody
Yeah.
for that."
Bye. Yeah. I'm out.
Like, yeah,
You're tracking me,
yeah,
yeah. But,
yeah,
you use the language you wanna use. I'm not saying you should, like, be not yourself in these, because obviously I want you to be yourself in these communications, but if we take the negativity lens off and
mhm,
we just put the informational lens on,
mhm, mhm.
it's a much easier, issue to address.
Remove the charge. I love
There
that.
you go.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always talk about, yeah, try to put your researcher hat on and not look at this as like good or bad, but simply like what is. That's what we spoke about a lot in the conversation, accepting your reality, where we're like, yeah, like look at it for what it is.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
feel what you need to feel, right? Because that's
Mhm.
important. And
Yeah.
also like look at it for what it is, because like you said, like this interpretation that we might have um could really be uh hindering us in a lot of ways. And if we make it like a bad thing or good thing, then like the other person's going to make it like a bad thing or a good thing.
Right,
And so
right,
like we want to make it a good thing, but also um if you're perceiving it as a bad thing, then shit is contagious. So
right, right.
be careful with that. So, okay. Well, we have
Agreed.
covered a lot. We asked you at the beginning of this conversation to consider what boundaries in your life need to evolve right now. What's that telling you, and what's telling you that they need to evolve? And so, hopefully, we have done our due diligence when it comes to giving you some information to water that seed that we planted. And so, definitely feel free to please let us know. Um, Anything that came up for you by sliding into our DMs, by commenting on this post. And yeah, let us know how we can help. So that's what we have for this episode's content. Where can they find you, ma'am? What do you have going on?
As you've said a few times, and I'm sure will be in the bio, excuse
Mm-hmm.
me, the description, for the
Whatever.
episode.
Somewhere.
My bio link will be there, and you all can click in. But I have two kind of homes on the internet. On Instagram, power.place.purpose, and my website, powerplacepurpose.com.
Yeah.
All the ways you can get a hold of me are there, and I do have my focus right now on meeting with clients one-on-one to help them work through what's getting in their way.
Mm-hmm.
I also have developed a workbook that is free. If you want to go click into the link that Johnna gives you, you'll be able to sign up for that. I'll send it to you electronically. It's over 20 pages of work around how to develop a relationship with yourself. Because when we know ourselves and accept ourselves, we can then love ourselves. And when we love ourselves, we can do anything.
Love it.
And your relationship with yourself is the longest one you have. So why not work on
Yeah.
it? Right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the workbook
Yeah.
is good stuff. So definitely do take advantage of that. And of course, like you said, everything will be linked. So description, bio, whatever, find her there, give her a follow, and just say hello. And I mean, definitely,
Yeah.
like you mentioned,
I'm
self love
nice.
journal is free, so might as well. You might as well get it. Um,
Absolutely.
so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for
You're
being with us.
welcome.
And what we have happening with the continuation of this episode. So our after party is going to be this Friday, so October 21st. We're looking at 10:15 over on Instagram. We'll be going live, and so on Wednesday there will be poll questions. I'll be asking in my stories on Instagram at Hey Johnna Renee. So make sure to check those out and respond and let us know what your experience has been in terms of the evolution of your boundaries, and ask us any and all questions that you have so that we can answer them live. And the thing that I want to mention about these questions is that if you've got one, then ask it, because chances are someone else does too. And
Absolutely.
I've said that forever, and I will keep saying that because I think that it's important to not only help yourself, but you're also helping others in that way whenever you ask questions that you have, because other people, like I said, might just be fearful of asking them themselves. And so go ahead, let us know. They're all anonymous. I can see it, but we don't say like who, like this person
Yeah.
asked this question. So definitely do let us know, and make sure to hop in there to share some shit that you or someone told you about the evolution of boundaries. Other than that, thank you for tuning in. If you have heard, or if you have gotten anything from this where
Mhm.
you've been like, yeah, I do need to learn more about myself, and some shit that I wish someone told me. The program, my program, should I wish someone told me, the signature program, we just wrapped enrollment last week. So currently closed for that. However, I still have something for you. I have created a training that is 5 reasons why self-help isn't helping and what will instead. And so I've just updated that, and you can definitely check that out at whenselfhelpisn'thelping.com, just all one word. And what that's going to do is give you an accompanying workbook and training videos that are going to help explain why, because I love to know a reason. I'd love to know a reason. And so it's going to explain 5 reasons why self help hasn't worked, and then give you the things to do instead with a workbook that can walk you through it. And best part, you can join the Should I Wish Someone Told Me Facebook private community, where other people are going to be working through this workbook too at the same time, and where I'm going to be there to support you with it, so that this isn't going to be something that you just download and then like don't do. It's actually like an interactive book club where we get to talk about what it is that you're doing. So make sure to go ahead when selfhelpisn'thelping.com. It will also be linked wherever. So follow Shanon, get her self love journal, follow me, get what I've got going on as well. Hop into the Facebook community and join us on Friday. So you got lots of homework. You got a lot of homework this episode,
Yeah, we
but
just gave them a ton, but that's okay. It's all good. It's all
it
good
is
stuff.
all good stuff. So thank you again for listening. Hope that you have an amazing day. If this was at all helpful for you, please do share it with someone that needs to hear some shit that we wish someone told us about the evolution of boundaries. Have an awesome day, and we will see you on Friday.